Rabbi Nancy Caston, and I am the Chief Relationship Officer for Faith Commons, which is an organization that was started by Dr. George Mason from Wilshire Baptist Church several years ago to bring faith voices into the public square for the common good. And George and I have been doing this work together now for a few years, and we didn't start too much before COVID times, so we've been doing a lot of what we do online, but looking forward very much to more in-person things, hopefully in the near future. And Cameron Vickery is an essential part of Faith Commons as our director of communications, and we're kind of a mom and pop organization where we just all kind of do what we know how to do and try to help fill in the rest. But none of this could happen without Cameron. So Cameron, thank you so much. Really appreciate your work and the way that you bring Faith Commons to people who are interested. And so we're doing these weekly workshops in preparation for a visit by Valerie Kaur, the founder of the Revolutionary Love Project. And this project is a way of addressing sort of the meta issue of how we see the world and how things are changing at such a rapid rate, and our inability to really or to fully address any one issue, whether it's poverty or healthcare or education or immigration, and we could go on and on, housing, transportation, without really addressing a whole concept of how we're interrelated to one another and how we live interdependently, and how we need to get better at living interdependently and to see abundance in the world rather than scarcity. And the work that Valerie Kaur does in the Revolutionary Love Project not only lifts up a vision of how we can feel connected to each other, but also tools for how to do that. And last week we discussed wonder as an act of revolutionary love and talked about how important it is to cultivate our ability to wonder about people and things that we don't know, and to try to see them as actually a part of ourselves that we don't yet know. And we acknowledged the difficulty that we sometimes have in being curious about things, because we might feel afraid of acknowledging how much we don't know, or we might be concerned that if we ask too many questions, we might offend somebody, or we might have to give up our assumptions about someone else and even our assumptions about ourselves. So that was our first point on Valerie Kaur's compass. And today we're going to talk about grieving and the role of grief as a tool for revolutionary love. And my partner in this conversation is Pastor Holly Gaskell Bandel, who is pastor at First United Methodist Church downtown, also known as First Church. Holly is a wonderful friend and partner, and First Church is one of our sponsoring organizations for bringing Valerie to Dallas. And really, we are inviting sponsorship from a wide variety of institutions and individuals in all kinds of that play all kinds of roles in our community, because we see this work as only being as impactful as the ability to learn the tools of revolutionary love and put them into place in every sector of our community together as partners. So we're thrilled that Holly is here with us today to talk about this point on the compass, to talk about grief. And in preparing for this today, Holly and I talked about how much unrecognized as well and unexpressed grief that we are experiencing both in ourselves and in others right now. There's been so much change in the world, and we're looking for our security and our comfort. And, Holly and her work in a congregation, places of worship, of course, people look to that. But our rituals have changed, our modes of engaging in our faith have changed. And so, Holly, you chose to join me this particular week because you are seeing a lot of grief in your work right now. Can you talk about that, what you're seeing, and how it's a little bit different than what you've seen in the past?
Right. No, thanks for that, Nancy. And thanks for inviting me to be here. It's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you and this wonderful group. I think for me that the question is, what are we not grieving? It feels like we are grieving everything. We're grieving in a pandemic, so many lives lost. I saw a new number come out today of 800,000 plus lives lost in the pandemic. We are grieving racial inequity and injustice, and the ways that since the murder of George Floyd and all of that last summer, May, and well, actually longer than that, but anyway, that we are collectively grieving so many different inequities in our society. And I think we are grieving change. So I know in our faith community, things are not the same. And even though we like sometimes to try to make things the same, they're just not. And so there is this deep frustration around how can't I just come and do what we've always done? And now we're doing those things differently because of a million different reasons of things that have changed. And so I really like, and I'm doing some work with our congregation, with our lay leaders around really pairing a change cycle with a grief cycle. And how do we understand ourselves grieving in all of the different changes, whether it's very local in a faith community or very global with societal change. And so I think a lot of what we see with outbursts and people that are so angry and frustrated in lots of different sectors in society, that's grief, and we don't know how to do it very well.
That's, it's interesting because so often, we want to avoid grief and we want to ignore grief, right? Because we think that that's the opposite of joy, or love even. But in fact, what Valerie talks about in her book, and the reason this is a point on the compass of and a tool for revolutionary love, is, she says, we grieve what we have loved. Loving someone means that one day there will be grieving. They will leave you or you will leave them. The more you love, the more you will grieve. Loving someone also means grieving with them. It means letting their pain and loss bleed into your own heart. And she says, when you see that pain coming, you may want to put up the guardrails and sound the alarm, raise the flag. But you must keep the borders of your heart porous when you love someone. And, this idea that the depth of our love can only be as deep as our ability to grieve, to accept grief, and to acknowledge it, and to be in it for ourselves and for others, is something that is, it isn't something we intellectually accept maybe, but I think we experience that, don't you? Doesn't that happen?
Yeah, I think so. I really think so. Nancy, as you're talking, a situation in my own life came to mind. I was 12 years old and I lost 3 grandparent figures in a year. And I started having headaches and, feeling dizzy. And eventually my parents got me to an adolescent psychologist who said, I think you're grieving. And that has just that understanding of how we grieve. No one else could kind of tell me what was happening. And so I think this really interpersonal way that we connect when we grieve and when we understand that we're grieving, that really is the embodiment of love. And yet there are, like you were saying, Nancy, in the quote, there are so many barriers that get in the way of us actually going there with one another. We're trying not to cry. We're trying to keep it together, and instead of really being in deep relationship with one another.
Right. And I think about, the pain that you felt with the headaches, the pain that people feel from the grief that they don't recognize as being grief. And then what happens to that pain? What happens to that, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain,
Right.
spiritual pain, and how so much of that, I think what we're seeing is that pain is being taken out on others, and people are lashing out rather than trying to figure out what's causing the pain. They're blaming other people for the pain. They're, you know, they raise a hue and cry because they're and we were talking about the loss of people, but you mentioned also the world is such a different place, and the idea that I keep coming back to that's used in schools to describe kids coming back to school and not knowing what to do and how to behave is dysregulation, right? But we don't know what the regular is. There's no regular, and we don't know what the regular is going to be. And so our ability to function in a healthy way is all wrapped up in our ability to connect with other people.
Right. Grieve with other people. Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, I think you're right on in terms of, talking about school and things like that. And if there's no one to say, hey, we have a generation of children that are trying to grieve what they don't understand, right? That explains a lot about schools right now. And I'm not, and I think that's giving me new language as we have school ministry and partnerships with Dallas ISD schools. To how do we understand that, and how do we lean into that in new ways that really does give those tools to students and their families. I think it's super key in our house right now with 2 teenagers, but for the whole, as well. No, I absolutely agree. I think that we haven't even really taught the next generation how to grieve, because we're all struggling with the grief and naming it and what it is, and the scapegoating that goes on continually. I mean, what if we looked at our political system right now and the polarization as a reflection of grief, of what different groups and different people perceive that they are losing in this? It maybe helps more compassion, and also helps have a direction to how do we begin to heal in that.
Right. And then also create new norms that aren't maybe like the ones we had before. I was thinking actually earlier, but when we were first getting on and just a few of you were on, Cameron was talking about her daughter, Sloan, who's in 1st grade, and she's sick and she's going to miss the holiday party. And last year when she was in kindergarten, there was no holiday party because it was COVID. And I think, okay, well, here's a kid who's never had the experience of a holiday party. So why would she grieve a holiday party that she's never experienced, right? But we have, by putting the expectation of the holiday party on everybody, even when maybe, I mean, this is, it's hard to imagine that there wouldn't be holiday parties anymore, but, maybe that's not the way that we connect and celebrate. And maybe there are other ways that we can do that will create that same sense of what we're looking for, which is ultimately that sense of love and joy and connectedness and celebrating in a community together, having accomplished certain things together, and there are all kinds of ways that people are developing that are foreign to us for do in to do that. And when we resist the new ways and keep sort of digging down on the old ways, I think sometimes we create more suffering than we need to.
Yeah, Nancy, I think what we're talking about here is a level of awareness of grief and what's going on internally that is really hard to experience. It's really hard to experience the pain, the suffering, the need for healing. That puts us, at least for me, in a very vulnerable space. And that's why there's also such the potential, I think, for love in that space. Is
Well,
because
and for joy. I mean, that's the other thing Valerie talks about is turning grief into joy. And I'm going to give you an example. And you know, and then I'd love to hear if others have some examples as well. But so I've been thinking a lot about Tatiana Jefferson because if you remember, she's the young woman who was living, she's actually from Dallas, living in Fort Worth, was playing video games with her nephew at 2 o'clock in the morning. A neighbor called just because he was worried that the lights were on, the door was open, and the police went over to check it out and ended up shooting and killing her. And it was, really horrible. Anyway, I actually ended up meeting her sister and nephew and aunt at an event, and we connected and we spoke, and we shared grief, and her sister talked about her son's needs and needs for mental health resources, and a friend of mine was with me and she was able to give her some resources, and that connection has lasted. And now that they're starting a foundation in her memory, in Tatiana's memory, to teach STEM skills to kids in schools that don't necessarily get that training. Also, the trial is coming up of the policeman who killed her, and questions about how to mark that and raise awareness of it. And I do get a sense of joy in that there's meaning and purpose to not just giving money to something, or signing a petition, or proclaiming my solidarity in some way, but actually having that relationship based in getting close, proximate to their pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyone else want to share an example or have a question? Well, so let me read you another quote, and this may also, it'll give you a sense of what she's trying to build with her work, and how we hope in Dallas to be part of that work, not just when she's here, but now as we're preparing, and also following her visit to continue that work. She says, when people who have no obvious reason to love each other come together to grieve, they give birth to new relationships, even revolutions. That's why I call grieving together an act of revolutionary love. To grieve with others is to share their pain without trying to minimize or erase it. Grieving with others requires a willingness to be transformed by their experiences, especially those who have suffered trauma and violence. Grieving collectively and in community gives us the information to build solidarity, to fight for justice, and even to share in another's joy.
Hey, Nancy, I was thinking as you were reading that scripture about coming together to remember and to kind of move toward celebration, I was thinking about just a few weeks ago. I've lost track of time. It's moving so fast. But when I saw you, Nancy, there at there in Dallas, and the placement of the historical marker for the life and death of Alan Brooks. And to me, that was one of those key moments communally that I've been doing in downtown ministry for 4.5 years. And I heard Alan Brooks' name and the lynching of Alan Brooks and that story within my first couple months of being in downtown Dallas. And so then, 4.5 years later, to be sitting there to have the marker place, which was just an amazing way that was done, to have the remembrance and really moving toward a sense of collective celebration that in Dallas, Texas, we now have this way of remembering and claiming the injustice and the harm and the violence, so that we can move toward more equity and justice in our city. And I felt like that was a huge, powerful moment that we were able to do that in a way that was significant, I think, for people who were there and for those who have been working for that kind of justice and remembering in our history for a long, long, long time.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, the backlash against wanting to grieve certain things is also, it's enlightening to kind of look at who's willing to grieve and with whom and who's not. And I think, again, the Revolutionary Love Project really tries to give us these tools to be able to grieve with anyone, to actually be able to see in anyone, no matter how angry they make us or how opposed they seem to be to our values, to see them actually as a part of ourself that we don't yet know. To acknowledge that there is whatever that is that pain, that suffering, that innate thing that's causing a person to do whatever they are doing is something that we have in ourselves as well. And when we acknowledge it and understand better how we express that same inclination or part of ourselves, we can connect rather than separate from others. So we're almost at the end of our time, but I wanted to, just open it up and first of all, remind everyone that if you're not already a sponsor or a partner for Valerie's Visit, we're going to have a public lecture on Wednesday night, February 2nd at Moody Performance Hall downtown, and then a workshop on around lunchtime on Thursday, February 3rd. We think that workshop's going to be at Paul Quinn College. We're waiting to see if that is going to be confirmed. But we hope that you all will participate. And Cameron just put her email in the chat, so you can email her. And whether or not you want to be a sponsor, please email her so you'll be on our mailing list and you'll get all the information about tickets and all the other programs that we are planning. And George just came on to say hello and goodbye. You're muted.
I've actually been on since about 5 minutes past, but yeah, just lurking. David and I are holding up our gender here, and
Thank you.
yes,
Representing.
but it's great to see everyone, and thank you, Holly and Nancy, for this conversation.
Holly, if you don't mind, I know I'm a little bit putting you on the spot, but just tell me what you hope that being a sponsor for Valerie Corps is going to contribute to your work at First Church.
I think where this really aligns with our work is that we've discovered in our work as faith community, particularly over these last 18 months, that one of the things that happens in faith community is where we like to do stuff, and we like to do stuff in the community and with community, and that's a part of who we are. And I think where her work really stands out is that in order to do that the way that we know that we'll have revolutionary love as kind of the end result and the output and the grace of that, is that it is internal interpersonal work that we do with one another that is the spiritual formation that she really calls us to, is the place where we are needing to lean in, because externally there is so much that you know, to kind of lean into all of those places, which we do all the time, but really to be grounded in our work of grief and forgiveness and in the ways that we love, is the spiritual journey that we really want for not only our faith community, but for our entire community.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, great. Well, with that, I think we're at the end of our time. I want to just, if Sloan is still there, we want to wish her that speedy recovery from her illness. We hope you feel better, Sloan. And we hope to see all of you next week when we will be talking about fight. And I have a friend and partner will be joining, Sadia Ahmed, a Muslim advocate in the community. And so I hope you'll come back and join us next week. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Holly.
Bye.